Imagine fighting for something so fundamental it feels like breathing. Now, imagine that very thing was once forbidden by law. Today, we're diving into the intense, heroic, and often violent struggle for education in the American South, right during and after the Civil War. It's a powerful story about a revolution that, you'll see, is in many ways still unfinished.
You know, Emily Dickinson wrote these words, and they just perfectly get to the heart of our story. For nearly 4 million enslaved people in the American South, the nectar of education was a sweetness they were legally forbidden to taste. Their need was the sorest need imaginable, and that deep, burning desire to learn, it became one of the most powerful forces of the 19th century.
And the reality of that prohibition was just stark. This wasn't some unwritten rule. This was brutally enforced law. State after state passed laws to punish anyone, and I mean anyone, who dared to teach an enslaved person to read or write. In South Carolina, an enslaved person could be whipped up to 50 lashes. In Mississippi, 39 lashes. And for a white person caught teaching, it could mean huge fines or months locked away in jail. This was a system designed to maintain absolute control by enforcing ignorance.
But here's the thing about a system built on oppression: it always produces rebels. And that brings us to the incredible story of a man who wouldn't just learn to read, but would go on to help rewrite the laws for an entire state. His name was Robert Smalls. Robert Smalls was born into slavery in Beaufort, South Carolina, and he was an exceptionally skilled mariner. I mean, just a natural on the water. By the time the Civil War kicked off, he was actually the pilot of the CSS Planter, a Confederate military transport ship. But get this, while he was navigating for the Confederacy, he was also secretly plotting his own course to freedom.
So on the night of May 13, 1862, the white officers left the ship. That was his moment. That was his chance. Smalls gathered his family and 15 others, put on the captain's hat, and then expertly navigated the ship right through the heavily armed Charleston harbor. He knew all the secret steam whistle signals for each checkpoint and nailed every single one. Once he was past that last Confederate fort, he ordered the Confederate flag lowered, raised a white bedsheet as a flag of surrender, and delivered his ship, its cargo of weapons, and 16 people to the Union Navy and to freedom.
I mean, can you imagine? This wasn't just an escape, it was a massive propaganda victory for the Union. Smalls was immediately hailed as a hero. Congress awarded him and his crew prize money for the captured ship, and he went on to serve the Union as a pilot, taking part in 17 different battles. His bravery became this incredibly powerful symbol of self-emancipation.
Smalls' story is just incredible, right? But he wasn't alone in this. His individual act of defiance was part of this huge collective hunger for knowledge that just exploded across the South. The second emancipation became a real possibility.
The great scholar W.E.B. Du Bois really captured the spirit of the era perfectly. He called it a crusade. You had these northern abolitionists, many of them women, the famous Yankee schoolma'ams, flocking to the South to teach. And the newly freed people, old and young, they just rushed to these makeshift schools with a passion that is hard for us to even comprehend, a passion to learn everything that had been denied to them for so long.
A perfect example of this whole crusade in action was the Penn School. It was founded way back in 1862, before the war was even over, as part of something called the Port Royal Experiment, kind of an early test run for Reconstruction. It started with just 9 adults in its very first class, and then, boom, within weeks it had exploded to nearly 50. It became a true beacon of learning in the Sea Islands.
And this, right here, gets to the very heart of that incredible change. A library. A quiet room filled with books, with ideas, with possibilities. For people who could have been whipped, or worse, for just holding the book a few years earlier, a place like this wasn't just a building. It was a sanctuary. It was the physical proof that they were free.
So while schools like Penn were literally transforming lives on the ground, Robert Smalls, well, he took his fight to the halls of power. He understood that to really secure freedom, you had to write it into the law.
And if you ever need a single image to show just how far he'd come, this is it. This is the one. After the war, Robert Smalls went back to his hometown of Beaufort, and he purchased the very mansion where he and his mother had been enslaved. And he would live in this house as a 5-term United States congressman. The reversal of fortune there is just staggering to think about.
So in 1868, at the convention to rewrite South Carolina's entire constitution, Robert Smalls stood up and introduced an idea that was, for the South at the time, completely revolutionary. A system of free, universal, state-supported public schools for every single child, black and white. Think about that.
former slaves, were now leading the charge for public education for everyone.
And the impact? It was immediate, and it was explosive. Just look at this chart for his home Beaufort County. In 1870, there were basically no public schools. 5 years later, just 5 years after Small's resolution became law, there were over 110. This wasn't just progress. This was a total transformation of society being built from the ground up by the very people the old system tried so hard to crush.
But of course, this kind of progress was a direct threat to the old order. And that old order, well, it did not go quietly. The response was brutal, it was organized, and it was terrifyingly effective.
53,000?
That was the number Robert Smalls himself cited. 53,000 Black Americans murdered in the South in the 30 years right after the war. And let's be clear, this was not random crime. This was political terrorism, carried out by groups like the Ku Klux Klan and others. It was all aimed at one thing: overthrowing Reconstruction and crushing Black political power through assassination and sheer terror. Smalls called it a carnival of bloodshed.
And the goal of all of this violence was explicit. Laura Town, the founder of the Penn School, she wrote this in 1877. She saw exactly what was happening. The resurgent white supremacists, the so-called Bourbon Democrats who wanted to restore the old order, they had a very specific target. They wanted to put an end to the education of Black people. They knew that to bring back the old hierarchy, they had to first destroy the school.
So what was the result of this epic struggle? What happened in the end? Well, the revolution wasn't completely defeated, but it was left deeply, tragically unfinished. This slide really lays out the stark contrast. On one side, you have the incredible promise of Reconstruction, universal education written into state constitutions, Black voting rights, the very principle of equality established in law. But then, on the other side, you have the harsh reality of the Jim Crow era that followed, which was a systematic dismantling of that promise. The schools became segregated and deliberately, cruelly underfunded. Voting rights were stripped away, and separate but equal became the law of the land, a hollow, cynical lie.
But, and this is so important, the seeds that were planted during Reconstruction, they didn't just die. Just look at the journey of the Penn School. It survived. It adapted, changing into an industrial and agricultural school to meet the community's needs. And even after it closed as a formal school, it was reborn as the Penn Center, which today is a vital institution that serves its community and preserves the unique Gullah culture of the Sea Islands. It's a living testament to the resilience of that original crusade for knowledge. And that brings us right back to where we started. This whole fight for education and equality that Robert Smalls, Laura Town, and countless others waged, it's often called America's unfinished revolution. So the question for us today is, what does that legacy mean now? What parts of that revolution are still waiting to be completed?